The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. Part 2. As the days passed, a change came over my grieving friend. No more did he play his guitar, paint, or even read. Instead, he roamed constantly from room to room with hurried but purposeless steps. His face became, if possible, even more pale and ghastly. His once bright eyes became dull. He spoke with a nervous tremor which seemed to come from some unknown terror. There were times I thought he struggled for the courage to confide to me a terrible secret. Then the moment would pass. At other times I became convinced it was his madness, for he stared into space for hours. He seemed to be listening to some imaginary sound. His condition terrified me, and then it infected me. I felt myself coming under the spell of the nameless terrors and the superstitions that so profoundly affected him. This feeling grew upon me gradually. It reached its full power about a week after we had placed the Lady Madeleine in the dungeon. It was a stormy night. I could not sleep. I lay awake as the dark hours passed. I tried to use my reason to get rid of the nervousness that came over me. I tried to tell myself that the gloomy furniture of my room and the dark draperies, they must be the cause of the oppressive feeling that lay upon me. But the terror would not leave me. Instead, it seemed to settle on me more heavily. I tried again to rid myself of its weight. I sat up in bed and listened to the sounds of the night. Through the storm I heard strange, low, faint sounds. Then they ceased, only to begin again after a few minutes. I was overcome by a strong sense of horror. I knew I would sleep no more that night, so I rose and hastily dressed. I tried now to get rid of the dread feelings by pacing the floor. I had taken only a few turns in this manner when I heard a step in the corridor. In an instant Usher was rapping at my door. He stared about the room silently for some minutes. Then he spoke. "You have not seen it?" he asked. "You have not, but you shall." With that, he hurried to a window and opened it to the storm. A furious gust of wind entered and nearly lifted us from our feet. It was a tempestuous yet strangely beautiful night. Clouds hung thickly about the turreted roof of the house. The wind blew in violent gusts, pausing now and again. The clouds were tossed about, coming together and then being blown apart before our eyes. The lower surfaces of the moving clouds and the tree trunks all about the house were bathed in an eerie glow. Yet no moon shone, no stars twinkled, no lightning flashed. What then was this strange, unnatural light that seemed to be circling about the old mansion? "You must not, you shall not watch this," I said with a shudder to Usher. I led him firmly away from the window to a chair. "These wild visions, they are simply electrical phenomena from the storm, or perhaps they rise from the swamp. I'll close the window. The air is too chilly and damp for you." I did so, and he did not protest. "Now," I said, picking up the nearest book, "I will read to you, and so we'll pass this stormy night." The story was an old adventure tale. The hero, Ethelred, set out to do battle with an evil hermit. I read. Arriving at the hermit's door, Ethelred lifted his sword and struck several blows in the wooden planks, cracking and ripping them apart. As I finished that sentence, my breath suddenly caught in my throat. I paused. It seemed to me, or was it my imagination, that from some remote part of the house came an exact sound like the one I had just described, a cracking and ripping of wood. Probably the storm, I thought, and returned to the story. Inside the house there was no sign of the hermit. Instead, Ethelred saw before him a scaly dragon with a tongue of fire. The dragon was sitting guard before a palace of gold, with a floor made of silver, and Ethelred uplifted his sword and struck off the head of the dragon. As it fell, the beast gave forth a horrible and piercing shriek. At these words there came to my ears a low and distant cry. It was a screaming or grating sound. very like the dragon's shriek of which I had just read. But this cry was not my imagination. I did hear it. The nameless terror I had felt in my sleepless bed earlier in the evening came over me again. But I was concerned for the nervous state of my friend, and I tried not to excite him. Perhaps he had not heard the distant cry. Perhaps I had imagined it. But a strange change had come over him. We had been sitting facing each other, but now he turned his chair away from me and faced it toward the door. His lips were trembling, his head was dropped on his chest, and his eyes were open wide. In this position he began swaying from side to side. To take his attention away from whatever he might have heard, I began hastily to read again. And now Ethelred pulled the dragon's body out of the way. Bravely he approached the castle, walking on the silver pavement. Over the castle doorway hung an enchanted shield of brass, the prize for anyone brave enough to kill the dragon. As Ethelred approached, the shield fell down at his feet upon the silver floor, with a mighty, great, and terrible ringing sound. No sooner had these words passed my lips than I became aware of another sound. It was a distant, hollow, metallic sound. Completely unnerved, I leaped to my feet. But Usher seemed undisturbed. He was still swaying gently from side to side, his eyes staring at nothing. I rushed to him and placed my hand on his shoulder to soothe him. A shudder came over his entire body, and he began to speak in a low, hurried murmur, unaware that I was even there. "Not hear it? Yes, I hear it, and have heard it," he said through quivering lips. "Long, long, long, many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it. Yet I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am! I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. I told you how sensitive I have become in my illness. Many days ago I heard her first feeble movements in the coffin, yet I dared not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, the breaking of the hermit's door, the death cry of the dragon, the clanging of the brass shield as it fell, what they really were the breaking of her coffin lid, the grating of the iron door of her prison, and her struggling to get out of the copper vault. Oh, where can I fly? She will be here soon to punish me for burying her before she was dead. Even now I hear her footstep on the stair. Even now I hear the horrible beating of her heart." At this he sprang furiously to his feet. "Madman!" he shrieked. "Madman! I tell you that she now stands outside this door." At his last words, the huge antique door opened slowly. From what? From a rushing gust of wind? And there, standing in the doorway, was the shrouded figure of the Lady Madeleine of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of a bitter struggle was upon every inch of her body. For a moment she stood trembling in the doorway. Then, with a low, moaning cry, she flew to her brother and threw herself violently upon him. With a cry of final death agony, she dragged him with her to the floor, a corpse. Roderick Usher was dead, a victim of the terrors he himself had foreseen. In my own terror, I fled from that room and from that mansion. The storm was still raging as I found myself out on the road. Suddenly, a wild light flashed across the path in front of me. I turned to see where it came from, for behind me were only the vast house and its shadows. Then I saw where the strange light was coming from. It was the blood-red light of a full, setting moon. It glowed through a crack in the wall of the house, the same zigzag crack I had noticed on my arrival, the crack that zigzagged its way down from the roof to end in the damp, swampy earth. While I gazed, this crack rapidly widened. Suddenly a fierce gust of wind, a whirlwind, burst upon the house. My brain reeled as I saw the once mighty walls come crashing down. I heard a tumultuous shouting, like the roaring voice of 1,000 oceans. I stood there, frozen, gazing in awe, as the tumbling walls began to sink. Then the deep swamp at my feet closed angrily and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher.